They thought she was no one, just a supply woman with a clipboard and dust on her boots. They didn't even use her name, they barely even saw her. When Harper Lane stepped off the transport van onto the blistering tarmac of Falcon Crest Air Base, the heat wasn't the only thing that hit her, the silence did. The kind of silence that comes not from peace, but from power. A silence that made clear this place ran on precision, pride, and pedigree. Harper didn't have any of those. Not visibly. Her uniform was grey, standard civilian logistics. No patches, no rank, no nameplate, just fabric and function. She looked more like someone who misplaced a lunch order than a woman cleared to step onto the most elite flight deck in the Western Command Sector. A scanner beeped reluctantly as she passed the security gate. No one greeted her. No one saluted. Inside, the base felt like a different planet, walls lined with simulation pods, screens filled with tactical data, trainees in spotless flight suits walking like they'd been born in cockpits. The kind of place where everyone had a name stitched in gold thread on their chest. And then there was Harper Plane, quiet and unannounced. She moved like she didn't notice, but she did. Logistics drop-offs go down the hall, barked a tall man in a navy flight vest as she passed. No loitering near flight ops unless you're cleared for wings. Harper nodded and kept walking. She wasn't here to loiter. The truth? She wasn't even supposed to be here. An internal system glitch routed her to Falcon Crest instead of her assigned post. She knew it was a misfile. She just chose not to correct it. Not yet. She wanted to see how this place operated beneath the polish. So she stayed silent. She watched. The next morning, she slipped into the rear of a trainee briefing. A dozen cadets sat in formation, eyes locked on the projection screens showing emergency descent procedures and storm turbulence modeling. Harper stood at the back, out of the light, listening, absorbing. When the instructor posed a question about asymmetric cargo shift during lateral crosswind, Harper raised her hand. She didn't even finish her sentence before the first laugh broke out. "She thinks she's here to brief pilots," someone muttered up front. A ripple of amusement spread through the room. The instructor didn't address her, just moved on. Later that afternoon, Harper was walking past the simulator corridor when a group of trainees blocked her path. At their center stood the golden boy of Falcon Crestmason Thorne, son of a decorated Air Force general, all smug grin and born privilege posture. Without warning, he tipped a bottle of blue electrolyte drink straight into her lap. "Get used to mopping up after real pilots," he smirked. Phones came out instantly, recording the moment. Not out of concern but for sport. They waited for her to snap, to cry, to yell. She didn't. She looked down at the spreading stain on her uniform. She didn't wipe it, didn't flinch. She just moved on, calm, measured. By week's end, it became official. She was assigned to manifest documentation and parts routing. Access to simulators? Denied. During drills, she stood behind observation glass like a forgotten shadow, while trainees fumbled torque settings and overcorrected rudders. She saw every mistake, but no one asked her opinion. At lunch, she sat alone. Her tray was always untouched, her expression unreadable. Her only companion? A small black notebook where she jotted notes that no one ever asked about. "She's a misfile," someone whispered. "Probably drone tech, or a logistics Barbie." No one knew what she carried inside her head or inside that notebook. No one cared. She didn't push back. She didn't ask for respect. But she was watching, recording, waiting. And that blue stain on her uniform? It never fully washed out. Day after day, it marked her what they thought was a symbol of her status. They were wrong. It was a signal, because she wasn't here to be seen. She was here to see them. And when the time came, they'd realize they hadn't been mocking a nobody. They'd been laughing at the wrong person. Harper Lane didn't argue when they locked her out of the simulators. She didn't complain when her ID chip only granted access to the storage bays, loading docks, and equipment inventories. She just kept moving clipboards in hand, boots steady, notebook tucked inside her jacket like a secret. The thing was, Harper wasn't trying to fit in. She was gathering data. Each day, she showed up before sunrise. While the rest of the cadets were still half asleep, dragging their flight suits across the mess hall, she was already doing round-scanning cargo crates, checking for faulty latches, verifying manifest codes by memory. She never needed to double-check. And even though no one ever asked, she made notes, detailed, technical, specific. Fuel-to-weight ratios, rear-axis instability thresholds, simulator error logs. Stuff that only instructors should have been reading, yet somehow she understood. During drills, she'd stand behind tinted glass and watch cadets crash perfectly functional simulations. They blamed wind modeling or throttle lag. Harper? She saw missed footwork, miscalibrated trims, failure to account for cross-drift under low visibility vectors. No one noticed her watching, but she noticed everything. One afternoon, during a windstorm simulation debrief, she saw Mason Thorne spin out mid-descent, overcorrect, and crash into the virtual canyon. The instructor said it was a bug. Harper knew better. "You forgot to stabilize your yaw control," she muttered under her breath. He didn't hear her, but the technician standing nearby did and glanced at her like he'd just seen something strange. She never explained. At lunch, it was always the same. End of the table, untouched food, notebook open. She'd sit quietly while cadets bragged about simulator scores and joked about promotions they hadn't earned yet. Someone called her "Logistics Barbie." Again, she didn't flinch. But she didn't forget either. One evening, after lights out, she sat in the empty mechanic's bay. The notebook was in her lap, her pen moving with the kind of calm that came from repetition. She was rewriting the Falcon Crest emergency lift sequence by hand from memory. At one point, she stopped, closed her eyes, and mouthed out a checklist. Hydraulic systems pressure, ramp lock confirmation, manual ballast trim. She didn't just know how to load the aircraft. She knew how to fly it. What no one realized was that Harper wasn't just a misfile. She was a certified Tier 9 heavy airframe pilot with combat-grade clearance 1 of only a handful in the system. The misrouting to Falcon Crest wasn't entirely random. Her records had been sealed under a black directive cleared for classified field evaluations. She hadn't been reassigned. She had been planted. But Harper didn't act like a spy. She didn't act like anything. She just kept doing what they thought she was, too low level to even understand. One night, after the wind died down and the sky turned a faint bruised purple, she walked along the flight line. Most cadets were asleep, but she wasn't interested in rest. She was looking at the C-130. It sat in the auxiliary bay massive, dented, old, forgotten. They all ignored it. Too slow, too heavy, too complicated. But Harper stood there for almost an hour, watching, tracing its shape like muscle memory. She could name every backup control on that bird. She had flown its sisters across blacked-out zones in live ops. She knew how it breathed under weight. Back in her bunk, alone at the far end of the logistics wing, her map of the base was taped inside her locker. Highlighted routes, access vents, blind spots, observation angles. Every night, she planned her next path through Falcon Crest. Every day, she moved through it, unnoticed. And every hour, she became more dangerous. Not because she was angry, not because she wanted revenge, but because the people around her had no idea who was standing in their shadow. And when pressure Kamino pride, not posturate, was going to be skill that mattered, she wouldn't need to raise her voice. She just had to wait for the silence. And then, she would answer it. It started with a sound low, pulsing, almost rhythmic. At first, Harper didn't move. She was in the maintenance bay, standing near a stack of worn-out coolant valves when the emergency siren began to rise. A few seconds later, lights turned crimson across the ceiling grid. The comms barked through static. All available units to logistics. This is not a drill. Harper was already walking. The rest of Falcon Crest spiraled into chaos. Inside the control hub, voices overlapped in panic. Engineers shouted over one another. Trainees stood frozen, unsure whether to run or wait for orders. The red alert kept pulsing, matching the quickening heartbeats in the room. Out on the main screen, a C-130. Two stripped-down Monet Abrams tanks strapped into its hold. A countdown, 42 minutes. That was all the time they had to deliver the tanks to a forward operations unit getting pinned down by an enemy assault. If they didn't make it, 24 soldiers would be overrun. But then the first pilot collapsed, followed by the second. Poisoning? Radiation? Nobody knew yet just that both assigned flight officers were suddenly incapacitated. Dizziness, slurred speech, stretchers rolled in. Medics scrambled. Now, the aircraft loaded, storm approaching, time ticking had no one to fly it. "Where are the backup pilots?" someone demanded. Still inbound from high bay minimum 3 hours out. The base commander's voice cracked through the noise. We've got 29 minutes left. We don't have 3 hours. Another officer added, no instructors are cleared to fly it under these wind conditions, not with that load. The storm had already touched the outer fence. Radar screens showed interference. The winds outside doubled in velocity. Sand whirled across the landing strip. In the far corner of the room, Mason Thorne stood stiffly, his jacket half-zipped. Sir, he said, jaw tight, I've logged time in the sim, but not with full cargo weight. This lift, it's suicide. No one moved. No one volunteered. One voice broke the quiet. We've got no one left. And that was when Harper stepped forward. She hadn't been on the emergency call-out list. She hadn't even been in the hangar when it started. But now calm, measured, like she'd been waiting, she spoke 5 words. I can fly it. The room stilled, as if someone had sucked the air from the walls. At first, there was laughter, the cruel kind. Someone near the mission console muttered, she even know which end lifts off. Another said, guess the janitor wants wings now. Harper didn't blink. Her voice remained even, almost casual. You're ramp seal at 19. Delta is about to fail. If it does mid-flight, you'll lose rear balance past 200 knots. You need to reverse harness the tanks and trim the ballast mid-air. Sway ratios are already outside safe arc. Silence. A technician, pale and shaking, typed frantically at his console. His eyes widened. She's right, he whispered. Everything she said, it checks out. The commander turned, face red. Who the hell are you? Harper looked him straight in the eye. Harper Lane. Field certified, Tier 9. Heavy frame combat transport. Cleared under Directive Delta 6. The words hit the room like a thunderclap. Someone near the back choked. That's black file clearance. Another officer murmured, there's no record of her, no logs, no mission entries. An aide leaned into the commander and whispered, Sir, it checks out. We have no one else. The commander stood frozen. Then finally he nodded. You've got 19 minutes. Harper returned the nod once. She didn't thank him. She didn't pause. She just turned and walked straight toward the prep corridor. She suited up alone, pulled the pressure suit over her grey uniform like she'd done it 100 times. Because she had. Outside, the storm howled harder. The hangar shook. Wind slammed against the aircraft doors like fists demanding entry. As she crossed the bay, crew members stepped aside without a word. The man who'd once blocked her path didn't even make eye contact. Mason Thorne stood near the edge of the bay, watching her in disbelief. She's going to crack the tail, he muttered. But no one laughed. No one stopped her. Inside the C-130 cockpit, Harper's fingers danced over the controls. Calm, exact, no assistance, no co-pilot. Just her. She crouched once in the cargo hold, checked every strap on the Abrams tanks, then moved back to the pilot seat. Her voice crackled over the comms. Falcon Crest, outbound load secure, ETA, 32 minutes, 1 soul on board. The base commander stared at the screen in silence. The turbines spun to life. The C-130 rolled forward into the storm. And Harper Lanionce ignored, once laughed, at became the only name that mattered. The storm didn't care who was flying. It roared over the airstrip like a living thing, whipping sand into spirals across the tarmac, testing every hinge of the C-130's frame. Inside, Harper Lane adjusted flap angles by instinct, not hesitation. The engines screamed against the crosswind as she taxied toward the far end of the runway. In the control tower, no one spoke. No jokes, no orders, just eyes watching. Wind shear increasing from the northeast, a comms officer warned. I've got it, Harper replied simply. At 140 knots, she pulled back. The aircraft lifted. The cargo groaned in the hold, the tanks straining against their restraints as turbulence struck hard. One strap buckled slightly, shifting the rear tank 3 degrees forward. Harper felt it, not through instruments through her body. She adjusted throttle bias manually, applied rear suspension trim override, and steadied the pitch. The plane shuddered, screamed and held. Altitude, climbing. Visibility, minimal. Resolve, absolute. She flew blind through a dust storm dense enough to rattle satellites, but her hands never shook. Midway through the flight, she ran backup diagnostics. One of the tank's moorings was strained, any harder impact, and it could snap loose on landing. So she recalculated her descent strategy manually, adjusted airflow across the rudders, wrote down an alternate touchdown sequence in her tablet like she'd done it 1,000 times. She had. 32 minutes later, she descended through a curtain of swirling dirt and distant gunfire. No tower lights, no guidance systems, just a blackout field outlined by chemical lamps. The mission crew on the ground stared upward, doubting what they were even seeing. The C-130 came in low-nose steady, wheels down. The landing gear kissed the dirt runway with a jolt. Brakes hissed. Dust exploded behind her like a shockwave. The tanks shifted then locked. No damage. No delay. No excuses. From the forward ops radio, a disbelieving voice broke in. C-130 delivery complete. Tanks secure. Is your flight crew intact? Harper replied without pause. Affirmative. One pilot. All cargo delivered. And that was it. She powered down the aircraft alone. No fanfare, no medals. Just silence and the weight of something unspoken. Back at Falcon Crest, they watched it all unfold through live telemetry. When the confirmation hit, no one said a word. The data came back clean. Stable systems, perfect delivery, mission accomplished. She had done what no one else had dared attempt. She had flown through it. By the time the C-130 reappeared in the desert sky, returning home, the entire base had gathered at the flight line. No announcement had been made. No roll call issued. But they stood there shoulders square, arms crossed, jackets tugged by the wind. The same men and women who had laughed, dismissed, mocked. Now they waited, silent. The plane touched down in a single sweeping arc. The rear wheels thudded softly. The engines whispered to a stop. And then Harper Lane stepped out. Her boots met the tarmac like thunder in the stillness. Her suit was dust-streaked, her braid loose at the nape of her neck. No rank, no badge. But she walked like someone who had carried a storm and returned unchanged. The base commander met her halfway, cap under his arm. His voice was quieter now, rough with something between shame and awe. "We misjudged you." Harper didn't answer. She didn't need to. Mason Thorne stood behind him, awkward, uncertain, his lips parted searching for an apology, but nothing he could say would touch what had already passed. Finally, he muttered, "I didn't know. I'm sorry." Harper met his eyes for one long moment, then walked right past him. Not out of anger, out of clarity. The other cadets straightened. No one told them to, but one by one, they stood in formation, shoulders back, faces forward, not for a photo, not for protocol. For her, not because of what she said, because of what she proved. As Harper walked the line, she met every gaze in silence. No gloating, no vengeance, only understanding. A kind of quiet strength that didn't demand respect. It taught it. At the end of the line, someone finally asked, "Will you stay? Lead us?" Harper paused. Her voice was calm, low, honest. "I wasn't meant to be here, but maybe now, someone like me will be." She turned and walked toward the edge of the flight line. Her figure grew smaller with each step dust swirling gently around her boots. No one followed. No one dared.